Hello, my name is Nathan with Dwaken. Today, I'm going to show off my system for evaluating creature cards in Magic the Gathering. Before we begin, I wanted to give a little warning. This video will involve some math. Nothing too complex, but you may want to have your calculators ready. So, let's start with the fundamentals. What are the main factors to consider when looking at a card? First off is the spell's mana value. This is the total converted mana required to cast the card. Another part of mana cost is color. Colored mana is represented by specific symbols. Next up, we have rarity. Magic has common, uncommon, rare, and mythic rare cards. The color of a card's set symbol generally indicate rarity, but can also be found on the bottom left of modern card frames. A creature's bread and butter are its power and toughness. Power represents that creature's offensive capability, while toughness is its defensive capacity. Lastly, there are abilities, which have a wide range of effects and can be beneficial or detrimental. An honorable mention is a creature's typing. Being legendary or being a certain subtype can be a factor, but this is unusual. A legendary creature typically uses unique mechanics without being too powerful, while subtypes only tend to matter for specific tribes, such as slivers. To better illustrate these points, let's use an example, Baneslayer Angel. The mana cost of this creature is 3 generic and 2 white, so the mana value is 5. Except for some creatures with mana value of 1, the first colored mana symbol is disregarded. Generally, the restrictive nature of having multiple colored mana means that a creature is more powerful. An identical creature with only 1 white mana in its cost would require 5 generic mana. This can be seen with hybrid mana, where 2 generic mana is valued the same as 1 colored mana. Since Baneslayer Angel has 2 white mana symbols, 1 point is added due to the second mana symbol. The set symbol's color is an orange-red gradient, which shows that this card is mythic rare. Common is the baseline, and is 3 levels below mythic, so 3 points are added. The idea behind this is that a creature with identical abilities and stats generally costs 1 generic mana less for each rarity above common. Baneslayer's power and toughness are both 5. When looking at power and toughness, I average the 2 numbers to determine a point value of 5. This technique comes with a big asterisk, as Wizards of the Coast tend to value power over toughness, but in general the average is a good reflection of strength. Now we have the abilities. Baneslayer Angel has flying, first strike, lifelink, protection from demons, and from dragons. This looks like 5 abilities, but their protection restriction is conditional enough to only be counted as 1, so the point value of the abilities is 4. I'll quickly touch on typing before we further elaborate. Baneslayer is not legendary, but it is an angel. One of the oldest tribes, Angel is a solid subtype with decent support. However, Angel is not so strong a tribe that it will be factored into this creature's power level. Now that we've broken this card down, let's bring it all together. The mana cost gives us 6 points, 5 from the mana value, and 1 from the second colored mana symbol, while the rarity offers 3 points. The power and toughness give 5 points, and the abilities give 4. Looking at the top half of the card, we add up the points for mana value, rarity, and colored mana to get 9. Looking at the bottom half of the card, we add up the points from the abilities and the power toughness average to also get 9. Since the top half points equal the bottom half points, this card would be considered fair, at least from an R&D perspective. Before going further, let's look at a few more examples. Keeping things simple for now, starting with some commons. We've got Steadfast Guard, a 2/2 human rebel with vigilance that costs 2 white mana. The top half is worth 3 points, 2 due to mana value and 1 from the second colored mana symbol. The bottom is also worth 3, 2 from the power and toughness, and 1 from its single ability, Vigilance. Phantom Monster costs 3 generic and 1 blue, and it is a 3/3 with flying. Noxious Grodeon costs 2 generic and 1 black, and it's a 2/2 with Death Touch. Hostile Minotaur is 3 generic and 1 red, and it is a 3/3 with haste. Colossal Dreadmaw is 4 generic and 2 green, so the top half is 7 points, The bottom half is also 7 because it is a 6/6 with trample. Now, I've cherry-picked examples that illustrate my point, so what about creatures that are busted or have unique abilities? What about Monastery Mentor, Uro, Cauldron Familiar, Dreadhorde Arcanist, or Golgari Grave Troll? Well, the cards look different, but each share 2 things in common. All 5 of these creatures have been banned or restricted in a constructed format, and each has a complex ability. So, let's use my card point system to try and reverse engineer how these creatures were designed. Monastery Mentor is a mythic rare 2/2 for 2 generic mana and a white. It has prowess, and whenever you cast a non-creature spell, put a 1/1 white monk creature token with prowess onto the battlefield. So the mana value is 3 points, while the rarity is also 3 points. The power and toughness is at 2, and the prowess ability adds 1. So this creature is fair, just considering the mana cost. However, that second ability is why this creature is a mythic rare, and for this reason, the second ability alone is worth 3 points. The power of the ability is why it was restricted in Vintage. There are so many powerful 0 and 1 cost non-creature spells available in Vintage that Monastery Mentor is one of the best win conditions for spell-slinging decks, as the ability allows those decks to easily create creatures and pump them up to build an oppressive board state. Like many new cards, Monastery Mentor was designed in a vacuum and was not created with Vintage in mind. Moving on to everyone's favorite, Uro, Titan of Nature's Wrath, a legendary 6/6 Elder Giant for 1 generic, a green, and a blue, coming in at Mythic Rare. When it enters the battlefield, it must be sacrificed unless it escaped. When Uro entered the battlefield or attacks, you gain 3 life and draw a card, then may put a land from your hand into play. You may cast Uro from the graveyard if you pay 2 green, 2 blue, and exile 5 other cards from your graveyard. So the mana value is 3, while the second green mana is worth 1 point, and the rarity is worth 3, for a total of 7 points on the upper half. The average power and toughness are 6, however, the sacrifice ability hurts the creature's combat capability, so that downside negates 3 points. The second ability is very powerful and creates a lot of value. A recent comparison would be Growth Spiral, an instant speed spell that lets you draw a card and put a land onto the field, costing a green and a blue. Uro is a creature and is cast sorcery speed, but the life gain balances out this downside, which is why this effect comes in at 3. Lastly, we have Escape. Now, it can be tough to judge one-time mechanics like this, but looking at other creatures, I think it's fair to say that R&D valued this ability at 1 point. The escape cost seems reasonable, in a vacuum at least. The mana value is 4, while the colored mana cost adds 3 points to this, and considering the rarity, the actual value is 10, which balances with the 6/6 stats, the 3-pointed value trifecta ability, and the recursion of Escape. What breaks this card are 2 issues. First, being able to play Uro from the graveyard makes it very difficult to deal with, while filling the yard with cards to exile is not. This means that the escape ability is being undervalued. Second, having the mana cost be exclusively colored mana may seem restrictive, but with good mana fixing, which is a given in most constructed formats, Uro is an incredibly powerful creature with too low a cost. Next up is Cauldron Familiar, an uncommon 1/1 cat for a black mana. When it enters the battlefield, each opponent loses 1 life, and you gain 1 life. You can also sacrifice a food and return the cat from your graveyard to the battlefield. For the mana value, I put it at 1.5 points. I briefly mentioned this earlier, but I'll further explain here. 1 black mana on a 1-drop is much more limiting than it is on, say, a 4 or 5 drop. That said, it's not so restrictive that it is akin to 2 generic mana, but it is somewhere in between, thus the reason for the 1.5 point value. Cat is an uncommon, which is 1 point, bringing the upper half to a total of 2.5 points. The cat's power and toughness count for 1 point, while the life drain ability counts for another point. Now its last ability is tricky. Food is another one of those parasitic mechanics, that will only be in a single set. I can see why R&D would value the recursion ability at half a point. In order to make it work, you need to sacrifice another one of your permanents, a type of permanent that isn't very common, and in the end, you just get a 1/1 cat. However, the issue was Witch's Oven and other sacrifice synergies, which led to Cat being banned. Witch's Oven is a 1-mana artifact with tap, sacrifice a creature, create a food, and some other stuff. This creates an efficient 2-card combo that leads to monotonous games of Magic. I think R&D knew this combo existed but didn't realize how easy it was to abuse it. Jumping back formats to Legacy, we have Dreadhorde Arcanist, a rare 1/3 for 1 generic and a red. It has Trample, and whenever it attacks, you may cast an instant or sorcery with mana value less than or equal to Arcanist's power from your graveyard without paying the mana cost. If that card would be put into your graveyard this turn, exile it instead. The mana value is 2, as is the rarity, bringing the upper card value to 4. The average power and toughness of Arcanist is 2, while Trample adds 1 point. This means that its lengthy second ability is worth another point. This kind of makes sense since the creature has to attack for the ability to trigger, and only can cast low-cost cards from the grave, and to prevent infinite loops those cards get exiled. The Trample ability gives away how R&D intended this card to be used. They wanted players to pump Arcanist, making its power higher. That way expensive cards could be cast from the grave. A fun type of recursion very much within Red's wheelhouse. The issue is that Legacy has powerful cards with low, and in some cases no, mana cost. This means that Arcanist was being used to jumpstart the value train, recasting Brainstorms and Lightning Bolts for free, which can be hard to beat. Another example of an ability which was undervalued in its design. Last on our list is Golgari Gravetroll. It costs 4 generic mana and 1 green, is a rare, and is a 0/0. It enters the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it for each creature card in your graveyard. Paying 1 mana and removing a +1/+1 counter lets you regenerate Golgari Gravetroll. Regenerate means that the next time this creature would be destroyed this turn, it isn't. Instead it taps, all damage is removed, and it is removed from combat. The troll also has Dredge 6, which lets you return it from your grave to your hand if you put 6 cards from the top of your library into the graveyard instead of drawing your next card. Let's start at the top. Golgari Gravetroll's mana value is 5, and its rarity is worth 2, for an upper card value of 7. Its power and toughness are both 0, so that doesn't count for any points. Let's skip the first ability for now. The Regenerate is on par when compared to other creatures with the same effect, and is worth 1 point. For Dredge, I'm also valuing it at 1 point. When you look at other creatures, they usually tacked this ability on for an extra mana, which we can see on Greater Moss Dog. Before I talk about why Dredge is broken, let's talk about the +1/+1 counter effect. I'm putting it at 5, which is admittedly way too high, but this makes sense from a design perspective. Imagine a fair game of Magic. Gravetroll is in your yard, and you dredge 6, putting a load of creatures into your graveyard. It can get pretty big, and when they playtested this, the average was likely around 5 +1/+1 counters. The Regenerate also protects it, while Dredge can bring it back if it dies. However, that's all in a world where you are casting this creature for 5 mana. The power of this card and the reason this card was banned is not because it is a good creature, but because its Dredge number is higher than any other Dredge card. It could be a 10 mana 0/0 with Dredge 6 as the only ability, and Troll would still be overpowered. From an R&D point of view, you can see why a high Dredge number would be seen as a partial downside. Players want to get their cards back without having to put too many of their cards in the graveyard, right? Clearly not, as Dredge is so powerful that it is the namesake of graveyard-centered decks in Vintage, Legacy, and Modern. Another case where the design team undervalued the power of an ability. Well, that's all I have for today. I planned for this video to be more theoretical, but I think the examples do a better job of demonstrating my theory than number charts would. I definitely intend to do more with the concept, so stay tuned for more videos. But until then, good night and good luck.